me in the studios. You all have seen him report from Gaza over the past 6 months, but today he joins me here in the studios, our very own Nizar Sadawi. Nizar, first of all, thank you very much for joining me here in the studios. Welcome to Istanbul, and on a personal level, I just want to thank you for the work that you have done in Gaza. It's truly inspirational. I understand that the situation there, the circumstances there for journalists are very tough. They don't have proper shelter. There's no food. There's no access to healthcare. But again, journalists like you and many others in Gaza continue to do their jobs to deliver truth to the world. So once again, thank you very much. Now, on a personal level, Nizar, what does press freedom mean to you?
Well, it depends. When we talk about press freedom, are we talking outside Gaza or inside Gaza? Because unfortunately, usually what press freedom would mean is that for journalists to be protected, for example, to be able to live decently. But in Gaza, that was absolutely not the case. I mean, every journalist in Gaza is working in the shadow of danger, protection, safety. This is just a luxury seldom afforded in Gaza. I can definitely say that. They continue to grapple with challenges that are manifold. It's unbelievable. No safety equipment, no food. And even when there is, journalists, I mean, it's difficult for everyone in Gaza, every citizen is, I wouldn't say has experienced this, because they are still experiencing this. But when it comes to journalists, for example, they don't have the luxury of time. They cannot stand in line for 4 or 5 hours to get some bread, for example, that if they could ever find any. So that's the case. But it's more about, the idea that whatever happens, no matter how much they try to amplify the voices of people there, they're not protected. It's one of two things. Either they will be targeted directly, or at best, and I do mean at best here, they could be targeted and killed and then later regarded as collateral damage. That's the case. So when I was in Gaza, for example, and I've seen this happening to so many of my friends who are, by the way, still there, many of them are still there in Gaza, we understood every time we went into the field to make a reportage or to do a live, or stand-up positions are not safe. You've seen that yourself. It could happen any moment. And even if that journalist in particular is not targeted, but the idea, the fact that they're moving around in a place that is absolutely not safe, that means that they could be killed at any moment. And the numbers do not lie, Jafar. Gaza Media Office says 141. Committee to Protect Journalists says 97. I mean, imagine that. That's about 5 journalists killed every week since October 7. This has never happened. This is absolutely unprecedented. And even though that the entire world is talking about this, nothing has happened. Even foreign journalists are still, until today, not allowed to go into the Gaza Strip. Israel, for example, on the other side, they have invaded journalists within the Israeli army. They allowed them to go with them. But that's not the case when it comes to Gaza.
Which is mind-boggling, isn't it? Because it's been more than 6 months now, and if I'm not mistaken, there was only one international journalist who works for an American network. She was allowed to enter Gaza, but of course she was with the Israeli army.
Exactly.
So why do you think that is the case? What is stopping Israel from giving access to these journalists?
That's the whole point. This is what journalists do. It's their job to tell the truth, but the truth varies. Everyone has their own truth. So Israel obviously does not want the world to see what is really happening on the ground. Of course, they would say that these journalists are not objective. And I wouldn't say that every journalist in Gaza or anywhere in the world is objective, but there are objective journalists. There is objective journalism everywhere, especially when it comes to Palestinian journalists. And guess what? Journalists in Palestine or in Gaza, they don't really have to lie. They don't need to lie because the truth is obvious this time. I've worked there for 17 years, and trust me, we've seen so many escalations.
We've never seen something like this before.
Nothing. Never. This has never happened before. And by the way, this isn't the first time Israel prevents foreign journalists from going into Gaza. But each time that happened, the international pressure somehow managed to, cause them to change their decisions and allow some journalists, but not this time, even though it has been now 7 months. And it's still ongoing.
And I know many international journalists have written petitions, but so far, no response from Israel. Now, Nizar, it's been more than 6 months. As we spoke, the conditions in Gaza are very tough for everyone who is trapped in the besieged enclave, but especially for journalists, children, and women. Talking about journalists, it requires a lot of mental strength, right? When you talk about doing your job, it's because we're not talking about weeks or 1 month or 2 months. We're talking about more than 6 months. I wonder what keeps journalists in Gaza, what keeps them going? How do they do their jobs? What is their motivation?
They're part of that community, Jafar. They're not strangers to the story. They live there, they're Palestinians. And perhaps this is, I would say, the only good thing that came out of this. The fact that these journalists did not have any colleagues from outside, it meant that they have a higher duty now to tell the truth. They don't have the luxury of taking off time. And by the way, these journalists are not just working hard because they're journalists. It's because they're Palestinians, and by the way, because they're homeless. Most of them, by the way. Even those who do have homes or places to stay in, again, they don't have the luxury of time. And when it's night time in Gaza, I do remember that. I've only been here for a few days. You cannot move freely because anything that moves can be targeted. That means that they had to stay close to their cameras. They had to stay with their crews, and they became families. We became one family, and that's why it hurts so much to see what is still happening, not, all in all to Palestinians, but especially to those journalists who have become our families. We didn't speak to our actual family, but we spent the entire time together. We ate together whenever we could find food. We drank water, although contaminated sometimes, I remember that. We slept together in tents, sometimes on the sidewalk. We were targeted together. We felt afraid together. So sometimes you would be having what looks like a breakfast with your friend/colleague. Then you two leave to different places to do your work. You come back to the station a few hours later, and then your colleagues say, "Azam Allah ajrakum," means, "May your friend rest in peace. He was just targeted." It happened a lot. And what hurts the most is that it's still happening until today.
Nizar, I'm at a loss of words. It's truly tragic, that's all I can say. But again, I think journalists like you and many others in Gaza, what they are doing is inspirational for journalists living outside Gaza around the world. And this is primarily why I believe we are seeing so much support within the journalist community towards Palestinian journalists. Nizar Sadawi, thank you very much for joining me here in the studios. Really appreciate your taking out the time. Now,